outcome level, and then even further than that, the impact level. We try to follow a development model for doing that, because where we can, we will use development funding which requires that, and that's the language our ministers speak and understand when they're looking at where we put the funding. So in terms of evidence, we need to be following that view, but we also need to have a consistent approach so that we can, and as we've been able to do in the UK, over 10 years, build a story and gather the evidence to be able to take back to ministers to say, this is why what we're doing works and why it's so important that we're still doing it with our partners across the world and nationally.
And then if I can ask you to look at your own role, because you're in charge of this programme in the UK. So how do you make your priority calls, and what sort of evidence base do you use to fix those priorities for the UK programme?
Very good question. I mean, it comes down to, one, looking at where there is a need, where we are not only going to be looking to put money, but where we will actually be able to work with the beneficiaries there, that there's a push and a pull. That's very important, so that we can, as fast as possible, be able to show that funding is generating evidence and creating impact. That is the main thing, really, that it comes down to.
Thank you, Amy. Can I ask you to pass the microphone on to Estefania? As I said in the introduction, Estefania has done a lot of research in this area, and I'd like you to focus, Estefania, on this question about the connection.
Is thinking about cyber incidents as a phenomenon driven by social, political, economic, and technical aspects, which makes everyone and everything connected to the network a potential victim. So in this sense, cyber incidents could target anyone connected to the network. But what we are finding in our research is that cybersecurity maturity matters in terms of how it can mitigate the damage these cyber incidents can cause. And if we talk about specific economic factors like, let's say, GDP, we are finding a negative, statistically significant correlation between cyber incidents and economic growth in developing countries only. We are also finding that the incidents that target specific industries such as finance, ICTs, the public sector have a greater correlation factor than any other type of incidents. And moreover, we're finding that industries that are more vulnerable to cyber incidents like finance and ICTs, they grow faster in countries that have higher cybersecurity maturity and be target as victims and that can face the cause of cyber incidents. And how these cyber incidents can represent a cost to the economy all the way to the national level. But Jamie, you are right. In terms of causation, we have yet to do more research in terms of finding a causal effect, because what we have so far found in our very initial stage of our research is a correlation or an association, meaning that the variable of cyber incidents and the variable of economic growth are growing simultaneously in opposite directions, but this doesn't mean that one is causing the other one to move. However, the literature has found causal effects of cyber incidents by looking at the micro level, meaning by looking at one or two main cyber incidents in the world and seeing how these cyber incidents have impact. Things like production chain, sales, reputation losses, contagion effects in different industries, mainly banking industry and other financial sectors. So our research, together with what the literature is saying, is, as I mentioned, we need to think about the full spectrum of the economic effects of cyber incidents. All the actors that are included in the contagion effects, all the type of costs that are induced after a cyber incident. So yeah, that's mainly what we've found.
And another quick question. There's a lot of people in the audience who are interested in monitoring and evaluation. And we'll come on to this a little bit in a moment, but just to start us off before I ask Nanjira some questions, what do you see as the main challenges in terms of actually getting the data that we need to do effective impact evaluation and evidence-based planning in this sphere?
Yeah, so the challenge is very clear. We know how to do impact evaluation of different types of investments. We know that we can do a cost-benefit analysis. But in cybersecurity, the benefits are hard to assess at this stage in the reality that we live today. And the reason for this is because there is not enough theory that can tell us about how to actually measure the different components of a benefit function, specifically the probability of a breach and the value of the information being protected. Those two components are non-identified at this stage of our reality. And the reason behind, besides also the theory, for not having identified these two components is that there is not enough data, or the data that is public available for researchers is not enough. So that's the practical challenge. We need to understand the benefits of cybersecurity investment from a cost-benefit angle, and we need to know the security breach function, and we need to know the value at risk of loss that the cybersecurity activity is trying to protect. But for this, we need more research and more data. And we need to start by understanding that cyber incidents are not a purely stochastic phenomenon. Now, we know with the research that we have so far is that cyber incidents are driven by different determinants, like I was telling, economic, political, social determinants. Therefore, with more research, we can be able to actually estimate these two factors that are missing, the probability breach function and the value at risk. So we need more research, we need more data, but the other angle also is to start thinking about cybersecurity as a different type of good, a good that might not need to go through this cost-benefit analysis, and this is a public good. If we start understanding cybersecurity as a public good, then this framework of cost-benefit analysis is not needed. But for this, we need to disentangle cybersecurity and think about cybersecurity as many different components, many different goods. Some of them are on robustness, other ones are on resilience, and the literature says that only robustness components should be treated as public good. So there is a lot of debate on this, and I can go for hours, but yeah, this is the main message.
Yeah, and I mean, what Estefania has done there is identified some of the strategic gaps in our current ability to do evidence-based planning and impact evaluation. And one of the outcomes that we're looking for from this conference in Accra this week is to start to build a community of people who are interested and are going to work together on this. We do have a session on that tomorrow at 12:15, I'm saying. 12:15, which is already quite full, but many of you will be there. For those who aren't there, or you're doing something else at the time, still please do stay in touch and be part of that collective effort, and we might touch on that a little bit more later. But first, Nanjira, with your broad international development experience and background, what would you expect to see? I mean, if cyber capacity building was to meet the same standard as broader international development, what would that look like in practical terms? What are the features?
Thanks for that. I'll start by saying I think what ends up being a truism, especially in Africa, is that not everything that is measured matters, and not everything that matters is measured. And that as a starting point helps with a lot of what we're talking about in terms of evaluation, monitoring, and so on. But just knowing back a bit, the best practices, as they tend to be called, we think we know them, but we assume a lot. And one aspect for me is that often when the words capacity building are uttered, and especially on the continent, it translates to training. There's that pedagogical aspect of an expert coming from across an ocean, maybe or two, coming to explain to you or bringing you up if visas allowed to their part of the world and that kind of thing. Well, that's been particularly interesting and challenging in the world, the field I'm looking at right now in digital financial inclusion, where Africa's trajectory has been markedly different in getting people to use technologies for finance than the rest of the world. We have the largest market for mobile money adoption. And mobile money adoption has brought not just the traditional banking sector, it is creating spaces that actually allow everybody to bring this expertise into the table to attack the problem of what we're addressing with cybersecurity. How do you set up measures to recommend regulatory practices that straddle sectors. That's something that's uniquely an African problem right now that could have benefits for the rest of the world as more fintechs disrupt the market. Context, I think we've heard that today. I mean, the context is really, really key. Is it a one-off conversation? Is it a one-off event, this cybersecurity capacity building that we'll be doing? Is it continuous? And this ties a lot to the sustained institutional resources, especially for development, that help whether a national CERT or a financial sector CERT, computer emergency response team, to be set up. Will they have the resourcing, both from their governments, both from development practitioners, both from all the other actors involved, to sustain? Because that sustainability is what will allow us to start getting the data that Estefania and others need to measure what's working and what's not. And the other thing I'll mention here is that, especially for those of us who are on the receiving side of development resources, if FCDO today comes with their own style and USAID comes with their other style, and then inserts, everyone is a capacity builder, we'll be overcapacitated on the same set of things if we're not careful. And we'll have to show up. I mean, the incentives work variedly. Some people will be there for per diem, some people will be there for the trip, but they won't be there for the actual issue we're dealing with. So the need for coordination on the global and international level is just as important as what is going to happen in the context, whether it's Ghana, whether it's Kenya, whether it's Macedonia, or anywhere else, where we're expecting to measure what is working.
Just pick you up on one point, this who is teaching who is such a powerful little thing to remind us of, and I think very relevant to a session, is it this afternoon or tomorrow morning, on principles for capacity building. So I'm rather hoping it will come up there. And this need for consistency. But I've got a question for you on this. So if we're going to make the evaluation relevant for the stakeholders within the country and not be over-dominated by the sort of financial management interests of the donors, for want of a better term, and what's the key data? What is the sort of bottom line data that you think citizens in Kenya, for example, are looking for to convince them that all this effort on cybersecurity is worthwhile?
I think it might sound trite, but it's really simple, that the systems they rely on will remain reliable. If there are damages, for example, in the financial sector, in Kenya, we rely a lot on mobile money. In the event that platform is down, if I do not incur financial loss, or if I incur financial loss, that there is a recourse mechanism, those elements that keep that system reliable will be the ultimate indicator, whether I'm a small business, whether I'm an individual, and honestly, whether I'm the government, because I want to hold up this as an example. So a lot of this is also tied to resilience and how we'll develop metrics for understanding resilience. The challenge with cybersecurity is not so much about whether we can prevent these attacks, it's about also how we bounce back from them. So that resilience aspect will be so important in the trustworthiness and the social factors that will determine how cybersecurity is also drives the trust in the systems we're asking people to rely on for daily use.
So of all the sort of evidence gaps that Estefania referred to, that's the one.
Honestly,
that's
it is.
The data
it is.
That we should
yeah. Because if I lose money today because my mobile money system has glitched, and there isn't any consumer protection division I can go and file a complaint, or there will be a long drawn-out court case, why would I use that system tomorrow? And if the story goes out in the newspapers and elsewhere that, Nanjira lost her money and it could happen to you, and that's usually the fast way to get people to know back on the system, it could happen to you. That is what is going to be a very interesting area to build a metric around, because if everybody knows this could happen to them, what are the measures to make sure that we minimize the harm or sort of resolve any threats that actually are incurred by people and institutions?
Thank you. We're going to go into a...
Decision makers can better understand the importance of investing in cybersecurity measures and invest in allocate appropriate resources for that. Measurements models also play important role. Models such as cybersecurity maturity model, risk management framework, and return of investment model should be pursued to support the decision-making process. And even when self-assessment is used as a methodology, if done right, these models can provide enough evidence for an insight into cybersecurity effectiveness and help identify priorities. let me use the opportunity to state that we need to think about at least two ways of communication about the evidence and measurements. The one is technical one, the official one. The other ones is toward the citizens, because when you're speaking to the citizens, you need to adopt the language so everybody can understand, which is not very easy sometimes, because of the different level of technical knowledge among in general among the citizens and so on. That's why we have done a training with the communicators to make them communicators in the ministries, to make them aware first what would be the best way to communicate the messages on a daily level and when they are going to witness cyber attacks. And it's very important. It's very important to have it in advance, steps that will not cause the panic among the citizens, and at the same time to make them aware that the state has the ownership of the situation, no matter what kind of situation it is, and that the people can rely and trust in institutions that they can deal with any kind of situation.
Thank you. Amy and Estefania, is there anything you want to add on this question of, what data do citizens need to convince them that this cybersecurity thing is worth doing?
I think what is very helpful, and it goes back to what you said before, is when we can show interventions that we're doing and the funding we are putting to cybersecurity internationally, how it is also linking back to help keep, in our case, the UK secure as well, and really driving home that point that anything we are doing in cybersecurity, it's cyberspace, so it's helping everyone. That is what our citizens like to see and hear.
So I think that the main thing that citizens need to know is the full spectrum of the economic costs of cyber incidents. This means the implicit and explicit cost of cyber incidents, or the direct and indirect costs. So when a cyber incident occurs, there is the cost to the direct victim, but research has shown that there are contagion effects that can go all the way to the consumers of the consumers, and so on. So I think going through the cost channel will be an effective way to communicate to citizens and to other stakeholders that cybersecurity matters and that this is a more complex topic than what it seems. Another way to communicate will also be to start thinking about the cyberspace as another field of defense, like land, water, air, that it's the centrality of it is humans, because humans are the ones that created and are manipulating the cyberspace. So if we start thinking, and if we start giving that message to citizens that the cyberspace is just like another space in which humans interact, that needs to be protected and that can cause potential harm to the end user, then I think that will be an effective way to communicate that cybersecurity matters for everyone.
Okay. I'm going to ask some more broad questions to the panel, but before I do that, can I just get a sense of how many audience questions we're likely to get, just so I can get the timing right? So there's actually, this is pointless because I can't see a thing. I've got at least two. Can I encourage anyone else? Or was that the same when you put your hand up? I've got three. Okay, so I want to give plenty of time for that. So the first question, again, this came out very strongly in the opening remarks this morning, that one of the drivers for this conference is also to convince the broader international development community that cybersecurity capacity building is a necessary part of that broader agenda. So my question to all of you is, how can we best communicate the importance of cybersecurity capacity building for digital development more broadly? What's the evidence that we need to support that case? And you might want to touch on to where do the SDGs fit in as the sort of gold standard of what we're all aiming for within, as a development community. Amy, you look like you want to kick us off.
Well, I've got the mic, so I will start. I think it links back to what I said before in terms of how we monitor and evaluate, to link that to how the international development funding requires monitoring and evaluation to also be done. So thinking through theories of change, thinking through outputs, outcomes, impacts, and speaking in that language to be able to show that that is cybersecurity has a clear link in. I'd also say when you refer to the SDGs, there's a clear link across, and we need to be making that in the, from my perspective, in the arguments we're giving to ministers as to why we need this funding.
Slavica, do you want to go next?
Yes. Well, continuing with the previous answer that I have, we need to. I think that one of the best ways is to foster open communication by establishing regular channels, because trying to transform our societies digitally and trying to introduce in parallel cybersecurity resilience, building a cyber resilient society. It is not. It's not depend on one person, on one ministry in the government, on one government. It is a society responsibility. So there needs to be an open communication with the media, with the private sector, with the universities, with the students, with all possible stakeholders that can contribute in this regard. And of course, collecting evidence and data that might contribute in getting the best possible policy making and decision making process. Of course, I mentioned before, events, trainings, increasing the awareness about the importance in such way, but also sharing success stories. Sharing success stories are crucial to make everybody aware, because in such way, even those who are not technical can understand what has happened and how the institution has dealt with it. But also using some bad example, hopefully not from the current state, but nevertheless, to use them as a lessons learned, because this is not the topic that is a hot topic for one country. It is impossible. We are all at the same box, I would say, and nevertheless, how developed we are, we can always face with the same thing, to be cyber attacked and to find a way how to deal with it. Nevertheless, on the development of our capacities. So, very much open communication with all stakeholders, finding the proper language to send the message, depends on the group of people that is based on the focus groups, and using data as much as possible, and success stories for lessons learned.
Yeah, case studies, very powerful. Estefania and then Nanjira.
Yeah, thank you. So I think data is the main thing. We need efforts to collect data and to share data, and to share data with key stakeholders that can develop and can push the limits of the knowledge of cybersecurity and how cybersecurity communicates with other fields like economics, engineering, computer science, and so on. So I think data is the key part. Once we have the data issue solved, I think more research and development will come, and more knowledge will come, and we will be able to understand more what cybersecurity incidents really mean, and what the cyberspace really represents for the whole society and for all stakeholders. And I just want to point out something. Physics has done an incredible job in trying to estimate almost purely a stochastic phenomenon. And they have done this through decades of research and decades of data collection. Cyber incidents, as I said, are not a purely stochastic event or phenomenon. So I'm positive that with more research and development and more data, we can be able to actually have, in a few years from now, more knowledge about how to predict and more tools to be able to predict and mitigate cybersecurity incidents. And we need to do this fast, because as you know, the mitigation efforts are growing, so are the harmful events and the harmful practices growing. So my main message will be research and development and data, the two in hand. Thank you.
There's something there in what you said about making best use of the data that we already have in terms of pulling those insights out. There is a lot, cyberspace is a data-rich environment.
Right.
Even though some data is hard to access, are we exploiting the data we do have to best effect? Nanjira, don't let that put you off what you were going to say.
I was just going to say, before we get the data is the narratives that help us get the buy-in to get the data. And in this regard to your question, is what we've experienced when we wanted to study cybersecurity in the digital financial inclusion space. Typical development practitioners have silos. So the cybersecurity teams will be very different from the digital development teams. But what we were able to paint as a narrative is, for example, in Africa, digital financial inclusion has been the drive of digitalization to the last mile, in the sense that money and the hurdles that money and moving of money have been eliminated by digital and the word of mouth that has helped people realize that's what should drive adoption, necessarily means we look into that area and look at what, as we get more digital tools in the hands of people, how do we make sure the security of those systems is not an afterthought? The broader financial system, in fact, cybersecurity only became a major consideration after the Bank of Bangladesh heist. And so we need to not stem the tide that we need these catastrophic events that are actually very harmful, not just to governments, but to individuals, to make the case for cybersecurity. So the narrative's about the fact that if you're driving investments in digitalization, you need to think about how security of those systems will happen, both from the design of the technologies to the regulatory environment, to the recourse mechanisms that will be available, because necessarily by driving digital, there will be a risk involved in cyber insecurity, if we may call it that. There in itself lies the environment around which we get creative with the question of what capacities are needed to make sure we minimize harm at every point in time for different stakeholders. Historically, CCB, cyber capacity building, was a state-to-state function, but here we are, we're talking about it in a multi-stakeholder way. And so for that to happen, that buy-in of the ecosystem effects is so important in the narrative about what digital is supposed to do for the society. Therefore, cybersecurity must go hand in hand, and the capacities therein follow.
And that connection with financial inclusion is so strong, maybe that's a good area to focus case study type work of the sort that Slavica recommended. Right, I'm going to hand over to the audience now, so you must remind me who had their raised hands, please, madam. We'll just... get the mic to you. Okay, please do say what your background is as well when you ask the question.
Of course, and thank you for this. My name is Caroline Troen. I work at the International Telecommunications Union, and I've been really enjoying this conversation because I lead work on the Global Cybersecurity Index, which touches on a few of these, but hopefully you'll be able to solve some of the challenges that we face out there as well. At the ITU's World Telecommunications ICT Indicators Symposium recently, there was a big conversation of we want to include cybersecurity as an indicator in terms of development. But there was a very, what's called spirited debate about what kind of indicator that should be. Because a lot of the measures we have, including the Global Cybersecurity Index, are input-based, not output-based. So I wanted to put that to you all. What kind of output-based indicators would you want to start with? Or even if the data doesn't exist right now, would you want to develop? And like Estefania, you were saying, that have a little bit more research and development around.
Who'd like to go first? Thank you, Nanjira. I knew you would.
It's great that you brought up the cybersecurity index, because what has been interesting to follow about it is the demand for input also creates this interesting pressure, especially for states, to perform. And we've seen that happen with the ease of business index and other indices sort of being rigged in that regard. But I think it's not going to be one indicator, it's going to be a subset, and it may take a sectoral approach. It might take something like, say, the financial sector and talking about, cases thwarted or, issues resolved, that kind of thing, that encourages, the information sharing that is showing that it's not about hiding. There's a lot of that, but we don't want to show our shameful side of having been hacked, and more about the success. So maybe success metric oriented, number of successful, avoiding this, that, or the other. And that's a less a data collection exercise than it is a political one. So we have our work cut out for us to make sure people don't feel like, as we ask for more data, we're making it's a shame-based factor. That's been a real issue with this drive for data. The politics of data and buy-in to actually even collectively come up with the indicators might be a better way to go about it. So, yeah, political.
You'd like?
Well, my point is, I think it's a very hard question, but I think we need to look at the incidents that the victims receive, in this case, the countries. And the only thing we know right now is the disclosed cyber incidents. And I think those are the ones in which we can rely the most. The incidents that somehow have been disclosed through the media channels, for example, thinking about all of the incidents that have been disclosed and the damage that they have caused, or if they have managed to penetrate. Maybe a variable around those terms or around those components could help in this very challenging task that you have at hand.
Very quickly, I would like to see as an output standards, to define standards which are minimum requirement for every society that needs to fulfill, so everybody will be sure that we are safe on a basic level, because it will provide a possibility to communicate among the countries, and then we will be sure that at least at some point we are secure from that point of view.
Thank you. There's a question 4 rows back in the middle.
Yes, hi. Phil Sheriff from Royal Holloway University, London. Nanjira, I'd just like to come on to your point about sustainability. Is cyber uniquely challenging from a sustainability side when you look at tech and licenses and the skills gap? Is it a uniquely challenging environment from a sustainability side? If so, how do we deal with it? And importantly, coming on to the main topic, how do we evidence-based that we are getting over that challenge?
I think it brings to sharp relief how much we've worked in silos in the past, because it's at once an infrastructural aspect. You want cloud computing to ease, sort of hardware, software aspects that would help with cybersecurity resources, for example. But that assumes that the infrastructure is there. So once it's calling for all of us to realize a mapping is needed about all the kinds of resources that are needed, hard infrastructure, soft infrastructure, people, and so on. And that, without that mapping, we could be running around in circles, first chasing the infrastructure, then chasing the people, then chasing the universities for the training that they'll do, and so on. So I think what it's really done, and especially for economies that are sort of on the earlier side of digitizing, is really presents a cool opportunity to map all of this in a more interdisciplinary way. And then sustainability then will also be a divide and conquer thing, because there are all these resources coming in from private sector, CSRs and others, but then they need to be better managed so that they can cover all the parts of the track. So I think it's a uniquely challenging thing insofar as it brings to light the fact that we've been working in silos a bit too long.
I think we'll hop to the last question now, and then we can get to coffee slightly earlier.
Thank you. Hi, Robert Collett, an Associate Fellow at Chatham House. It strikes me that the private sector are going to be key to that question of indicators, because they hold so much of the data, particularly the insurance industry, but also the big cybersecurity companies. I was wondering if you could say, from your experience in your country, or your organization, how mature is that partnership with the private sector? And is there anything we could do as a community to build public-private partnerships to get access to the data that we need?
Hello? I've been... Bad. I'm pleased you raised public-private partnerships, because that's what I tend to say on most days, to be honest. We can't deliver our programs without public-private partnerships. Within government, we have a certain level of technical ability, but we don't have the scale and we don't have the amount that industry has to offer. So I would say, in terms of looking across our programs, we have quite a mature public-private partnership across our industries. It's always something we're looking to improve. In terms of how we can get better at that and what industry can do for us, I think it's about, as much as is possible, recognising the trade-offs from private sector sometimes working competing is to have that communication door open and that channel open as much as possible for sharing of lessons learned.
I think, yes, did you want to add anything, Estefania? Just, yeah, please.
Well, I think the point is super interesting and super smart. I think this is where the role of the government plays an important part, honestly. We have to understand that since cyber incidents are related with costs, economic costs, there will always be an incentive to not disclose cyber incidents. So that's a key aspect where the government could take part and could help in this agenda of actually opening up this space. Like there is successful stories, like in the US, they have very, very good data on cyber incidents, and the research in the US is very advanced. So if we can try to point towards that direction, it will be very, very good.
Great, we have some consensus. So thank you all very much for coming to this session. As I said earlier, there's a practitioner session tomorrow, but even if you can't make that, please do stay in touch. You've shown an interest in the subject, and we want that community, including the private sector, Robert, as you said. Before you go, we've just got some small gifts for our panelists, and a round of applause, please.